Nobody tells you what the gun actually feels like when you're pointing it at someone you love. They put you through the academy. They run you through scenarios, hostage simulations, active shooter drills, de-escalation protocols that assume the person on the other end of the barrel is still making rational decisions. They test your reaction time, your grip pressure, your breathing. They grade you on stance. They never once prepare you for the moment your hands stop shaking. Not because you've gotten calmer, but because something inside you has gone completely, irreversibly quiet. My name is Daniel Reyes. I had been a sworn officer with the Hargrove City Police Department for exactly 41 days when the outbreak began. Not months, days. I was still on supervised field rotation. My badge still had that factory floor shine that veteran cops either smirk at or pretend not to notice. I hadn't even broken in my second pair of duty boots. My partner's name was Sergeant Carla Voss. 15 years on the job, composed in the way that only comes from having seen the worst of what people do to each other and deciding, consciously, to keep showing up anyway. She wore her dark hair pulled tight, drove with one hand, and had a habit of eating gas station protein bars without ever taking her eyes off the road. She wasn't warm, exactly, but she was steady, and in those first weeks, steady was everything I needed. The morning it started the real start, not the news ticker version they'll eventually write about. We were running a standard welfare check on Delmore Avenue. Call had come in from a neighbor. Elderly resident, hadn't collected his mail in 4 days. Lights on at strange hours. Routine. The kind of call that fills most of a shift and rarely becomes anything. I remember the street. Early October. So the maples had gone full amber. And someone 3 houses down was burning leaves that sweet, particular smoke that I will never again associate with anything other than that morning. Carla pulled the cruiser to the curb. She radioed our position, clipped her radio to her shoulder, and nodded once at me the way she always did before we approached a door. A nod that meant, stay close, stay sharp, let me do the talking. The door to the residence was ajar. Not broken, not forced. Just open the way a door gets when someone steps out expecting to return in 30 seconds and simply doesn't. A thin wedge of interior shadow showing through the gap. The screen door drifting slightly in the October air. Carla called out. Standard protocol. Hargrove PD, Mr. Bellamy, we received a welfare call. Just checking in, sir, if you could come to the door. Silence. She called again. The response, when it came, was not language. It was a sound I had no prior category for, a low, wet, continuous exhalation, like breathing through a punctured lung, sustained in a way that lungs simply are not built to sustain. Something moved behind the gap in the door. The shadows shifted. The screen door swung outward with a force entirely disproportionate to the frailty of the 73-year-old man whose face I recognized from the neighbor's photograph. Raymond Bellamy, retired postal worker, known to feed the neighborhood cats. He was missing one shoe. What I saw in his eyes was not aggression. That's the thing I keep coming back to even now, years removed from the moment. It wasn't anger or intent or any of the readable human signals you're taught to assess. His eyes were present, but purposeless. The light still on in a house where nobody was home anymore. He moved toward Carla without hesitation, without strategy, without self-preservation. He moved the way water moves downhill, inevitable and indifferent. Carla had her sidearm drawn before I processed what I was seeing. I was still reaching for mine when she fired. I remember the sound. I remember the leaves still burning somewhere down the block. I remember thinking, with the bizarre clarity that shock sometimes produces, this is the first day of something that doesn't have a last day yet. I was right about that. I wish I hadn't been. The radio started changing within the hour. Dispatch had always been a kind of white noise on rotation: license plate confirmations, noise complaints, domestic disturbance calls that cycled through the same addresses every weekend. You learned to filter it, to let most of it run below conscious attention while keeping one part of your brain tuned for your unit number or anything that spiked in urgency. By mid-morning on that first day, the spike was continuous. Dispatch couldn't keep up with the volume. Carla drove us back to the precinct without saying much. She had holstered her weapon with the practiced efficiency of someone filing paperwork. No tremor, no pause. But I noticed she'd gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. Her knuckles carrying a tension the rest of her face refused to show. She had called the shooting in cleanly, used all the right terminology, kept her voice flat and professional. I had said nothing because I had nothing yet. Just the image cycling behind my eyes, Raymond Bellamy moving through that doorway without shoes, without recognition, without whatever it is that makes a person rather than a force. The precinct on Callaway Street was a squat 2-story building that always smelled of burnt coffee and printer toner. When we pulled in, the parking lot had twice its normal occupancy. Officers I'd never seen during my rotation were standing outside in partial gear, phones pressed to their ears, gesturing at nothing in particular. Lieutenant Harmon was on the front steps, talking fast to 2 men I didn't recognize, plain clothes. No badges visible, but with the particular posture of people accustomed to being listened to. "Voss," Harmon said, the moment Carla stepped out of the car. He didn't look at me. "Sir." She matched his pace immediately, and they moved off to the side with the practiced efficiency of people used to having conversations that couldn't wait. I stood beside the cruiser, badge catching October sunlight, feeling the specific loneliness of being the least experienced person in a building full of people who just realized experience might not be enough. An officer named Pruitt found me near the equipment cage. Marcus Pruitt, Patrol Division, 8 years in, built wide through the shoulders, with the unhurried manner of someone who had survived enough bad shifts to know that panic was just energy misdirected. He handed me a coffee without being asked. I still remember that, the small, unremarkable kindness of it. "You were first seen this morning?" he asked. "Delmore Avenue, with Voss." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "You fire your weapon?" "Voss did." Another nod. "More coming in. Same presentation. Dispatch is logging 6, now 7 similar reports in a 6-block radius. Medical's overwhelmed. County hospital called a lockdown 20 minutes ago." I processed that. "Lockdown for what?" He looked at me directly for a moment, measuring something. "Containment. Their word." He took a long drink from his own cup. "Nobody's using the right word yet. Officially." I didn't ask what he meant. I think some part of me already knew and was simply choosing, for those last few minutes, to let the official version remain intact. There's a comfort in institutional language in incident and containment and affected individuals that delays the moment when you have to accept that the language itself has failed. The briefing that followed was conducted in the main room, officers standing in uneven rows, and Lieutenant Harmon stood at the front with the expression of a man who was editing his words in real time, trying to convey enough urgency without triggering the cascade that comes when trained. Armed people accept simultaneously that the situation exceeds their training. He used the word pathogen. He used the phrase behavioral modification. He said non-communicative aggression and contact protocols and escalating force authorization. He never once said what every person in that room was already thinking, which was the only word that actually fit what was happening in the streets outside. I stood in the back row next to Pruitt. Carla was near the front, arms folded, face unreadable. The radio on the equipment table continued logging calls, the dispatcher's voice growing incrementally tighter with each transmission. A pressure building under the professional surface like water against a dam, the engineers have started to privately doubt. By the time Harmon finished speaking, 2 more officers had left the room quietly, without explanation. Their cruisers were gone from the lot by the time we dispersed. Nobody said anything about it. The clock on the wall read 11:47 a.m. The day had barely started. They put us back on the street by noon. I understand now why that decision was made, though I've spent considerable time examining it from every angle available to hindsight. The calculation was institutional. Visible patrol presence signals stability. Stability slows panic. Slowing panic buys time for a response that somebody, somewhere, was presumably coordinating. The calculation made sense inside the logic of ordinary crisis management. The problem was that the situation had already exited ordinary crisis management and was operating under a different set of rules, entirely rules that hadn't been written yet because nobody had needed them before. Carla drove. She always drove. I had learned in my first week of rotation that this was non-negotiable, not from arrogance, but from the deep-wired efficiency of someone who had eliminated small frictions from her routine over 15 years until everything that could be automatic was. She drove, I navigated and logged, and between us we covered more ground with less friction than any other pairing in the precinct. It was a good system. It had served us well for 40 days. The city looked almost normal from the cruiser window. October commerce preceding a dry cleaner's van double-parked on Serrano, a food cart on the corner of 5th still doing lunch business, a school bus sitting idle at a crosswalk with its hazards on. The veneer of the ordinary held for about 8 blocks. Then we turned onto Merchant Street, and the veneer came apart. The traffic had stopped, not in the gridlock way of construction or an accident, but in the abandoned way of cars left mid-lane with doors open, as though everyone had simultaneously decided to get out and walk, and had done so without turning off their engines. A sedan in the left lane was still idling. A delivery truck had rolled softly into the back of a parked minivan and stopped there. Engine running, door open, driver gone. The street was populated by cars and empty of people, which in the middle of a Wednesday lunch hour is as wrong as a sky the wrong color. "Radio," Carla said. I picked it up. Dispatch had gone to a rolling announcement format, no longer responding to individual units in sequence, just broadcasting location-tagged alerts in succession. The language was deteriorating. The careful clinical vocabulary from Harmon's briefing was giving way, in the dispatcher's voice, to a compression of words that meant she was logging faster than she could manage. 3 blocks ahead, a figure walked directly out of a pharmacy into the intersection without looking. Male, mid-30s, in the shirt and slacks of someone who had been at a desk job 90 minutes ago. He moved with that same quality I'd first seen in Raymond Bellamy's doorway, purposeful but purposeless. Directionality without destination. Carla brought the cruiser to a stop. We sat watching him. He turned toward the car. The sound that came from him reached us even through the closed windows, that low, wet resonance that my brain had already begun filing under wrong before I had formal language for why. "We don't engage unless he approaches," Carla said quietly. He approached. We had both stepped out, weapons drawn, before the calculation was conscious. Protocol, distance maintenance, verbal commands, escalating intervention, I called out. He did not process the sound as instruction. He covered 20 feet in 8 seconds, with a gait that was wrong in ways I kept trying to quantify, too rigid in the shoulders, too even in the stride, like something that had learned to imitate walking from a description rather than practice. Carla fired twice. Controlled, precise. The intersection went quiet except for the idling engines. I stood in the middle of Merchant Street with my weapon still raised, aimed at nothing, and the full weight of what this day was going to require of me settled into my chest like a structural load, the kind you feel in the bones before you recognize it in the mind. "Lower your weapon," Carla said. Not sharply, evenly. I lowered it. She was already on the radio. Her voice was steady. I was working on making mine the same. By nightfall, I would understand that the steadiness was a decision, not a condition. That it cost something. That every time you chose it, you made a small withdrawal from an account you couldn't always see the balance of. But that understanding was still hours away, and the day had more to show us first. By 3 in the afternoon, the eastern precincts had gone dark. Not dark as in offline. Dark as in silent. No response, no radio traffic, no acknowledgement of transmissions. Dispatch logged the last confirmed contact from Precinct 7 at 2:48 p.m. And after that, frequency on that channel was white noise. Harmon had tried a direct vehicle dispatch 2 officers sent to check in person, and those officers had not returned or reported back within the hour. Their unit was listed as non-responsive at 4:15. After that, nobody sent anyone east. The precinct on Callaway had become an improvised coordination hub, and officers from surrounding jurisdictions were arriving sporadically, a state trooper who had been diverted from the highway after an incident at the interchange. 2 transit cops whose station had been evacuated. A sergeant from the county sheriff who arrived alone and wouldn't explain why. The common room was full of people who all outranked each other in their respective departments and were collectively avoiding the question of who was in charge. Carla found this inefficiency visibly intolerable. She had commandeered a section of wall near the equipment cage, taped up a city map, and was marking confirmed incident locations with a red marker in a way that made the pattern obvious even at a distance. The pattern was radiating. Whatever this was, it was not contained to the Eastern District or the Delmore Avenue corridor. It was spreading outward from multiple simultaneous points, which meant the containment assumption, the idea that had animated the morning's official language, was already obsolete. I stood next to her at the map. "You knew this morning," I said. Not an accusation, an observation. She capped the marker, looked at the map. I suspected. What changed it from a single incident to... I gestured at the red marks on the map. "The sound," she said. "Bellamy made a sound. I'd heard it twice before in my career. Once on a call 6 years ago, man, in a parking garage. Later determined to be a drug interaction with an experimental compound. He died before we understood what we were dealing with. Once in footage from an overseas briefing we were shown at a counterterrorism training, very briefly. They moved past it fast." She looked at me. "I filed a report after the parking garage incident. It went nowhere. People don't follow up on sounds that don't repeat." I absorbed this. The weight of it, the years between the parking garage and this map, covered in red marks, sat between us, without either of us naming it. Pruitt appeared at my shoulder. "Harmon wants all available units in the briefing room." The briefing was shorter than the mornings. Harmon looked like a man who had aged 4 hours in one, which he had. The State Emergency Management Office had issued a shelter-in-place advisory for the city at 3:30 p.m. The National Guard had been requested. Cell service was degrading either from tower damage or volume overload. Nobody was certain which. The hospital system was requesting law enforcement support at 3 locations simultaneously. He split the room into response teams, with the exhausted precision of someone who knew the resources were insufficient and was deploying them anyway because the alternative was to stand still and standing still in a spreading situation is its own kind of decision. Carla and I drew the Memorial Hospital support assignment. We drove south on Grant Avenue in the declining afternoon light, the radio giving us fragments, a looting report on West Garner. An officer down call that was reclassified mid-transmission. A voice that I thought was a child broadcasting on an emergency frequency before the signal broke apart. The city was reorganizing itself around the new reality in real time. And the reorganization was not orderly. Memorial's main entrance was blocked by 3 ambulances parked at angles that suggested emergency rather than logistics. We badged through a side entrance, and a charge nurse who looked like she hadn't sat down since morning intercepted us in the corridor and spoke in the compressed, bullet-point language of someone managing 5 situations in parallel. We have 12 in isolation, 7 secured in the East Wing, 2 confirmed turnovers in the last hour that we are not equipped to manage, and we need you in containment on the 3rd floor. She turned before she finished the sentence, expecting us to follow. We followed. The elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, and I heard from somewhere down the corridor a sound I had first heard on Delmore Avenue that morning. That particular resonance that had no precedent in any sound human mouths were built to make. Only this time, there were more of them. The corridor stretched ahead of us toward a set of double doors that were shuddering in their frame from the pressure of something on the other side. Carla's hand went to her sidearm. Mine followed. The day was teaching us what it intended to take, 1 floor at a time. The double doors held for another 40 seconds. I know because Carla counted quietly, barely moving her lips, the way she counted through everything that required discipline rather than speed. It was a habit she'd explained to me once during an overnight shift. Counting gives your brain something structured to do while your instincts handle the variables. 40 seconds of those doors shuddering in their frame. The hardware groaning under intermittent pressure. The sounds from the other side cycling through registers that the human auditory system recognizes as threat before the conscious mind catches up. The charge nurse, her name tag read R. Dominguez, had backed to the elevator bank. She was calm in the specific way that emergency medicine produces, not the absence of fear, but fear made completely subordinate to function. She was on a hospital radio, speaking in low, fast bursts, coordinating something further back in the building. Whatever was on the other side of those doors was not her first managed crisis today. It was simply the one she didn't have the tools for. How many? Carla asked her. Confirmed 7 on the 3rd floor when we sealed the corridor. 3 were admitted this morning, presenting with altered behavior. 4 turned in the last 2 hours, 2 patients, an orderly and... She paused, half a pause, and a physician. The doors buckled once, hard. The upper hinge on the left side gave a metallic complaint that meant the frame, not just the doors, was taking stress now. Exit points, Carla said. Stairwells at both ends. North stairwell is clear. South stairwell I can't confirm. There's a fire exit midway down the corridor, but it would require going past. The left door came off its upper hinge. What followed was not chaos, which surprised me. Chaos implies disorder, randomness, events exceeding the capacity to respond. What happened in that corridor was more terrible than chaos. It was organized around a single simple logic, and that logic was proximity. They came through the gap in the door with the same directionality without destination I had cataloged all day. No hesitation, no assessment of numbers or positions or exits, no apparent awareness that Carla and I represented any different category of obstacle than the walls. Carla was already backing toward the north stairwell, weapon raised, voice issuing commands that I knew even as she spoke them would not be processed as commands. I flanked left, maintaining the coverage angle we'd drilled. And the 7 bodies in that corridor distributed themselves between us with the terrible impartiality of physics. What I will not describe at length is what the next 4 minutes required of us. What I will say is this. There is a mechanism in trained response that your instructors describe as compartmentalization. The ability to process a situation tactically while deferring its emotional weight to a later, safer moment. I had been told this was a skill that developed over time, that rookies struggled with it, that the gap between event and emotional processing narrowed with experience. What I discovered on the 3rd floor of Memorial Hospital was that the mechanism activates not gradually but instantly, under sufficient pressure, and that the activation is not painless. It costs something you don't name until later, when you're somewhere quieter and the compartment opens on its own, regardless of whether you're ready. We reached the north stairwell. Dominguez was already through the door. Carla followed, and I came last, pulling the door shut behind me, a door with no external lock, which meant it bought seconds, not safety. 3 flights down, ground floor corridor. A hospital that had been a functioning facility 6 hours ago and was now a building in the process of being reclaimed by something that operated without respect for its function or its architecture. We found a loading bay in the basement that was still clear. Dominguez knew the building's service layout. This was her 3rd evacuation route of the day. She moved through it without referencing anything, the map entirely internal. "Staff?" Carla asked as we moved. 17 accounted for in the West Wing shelter room. Unknown numbers, unaccounted for. Her voice didn't waver on the last sentence. She was a person who had learned to carry unknowns without letting them stop her feet. I had a lot to learn from her. I was starting immediately. The loading bay gave us a service exit onto a narrow street that ran behind the hospital's south face. The sky had taken on the flat gray quality of a late October afternoon that intended to become dark earlier than expected, and the ambient sound of the city and the bass line that you stop hearing because it's always there had changed. Not gone, changed. The traffic noise was wrong in its frequency distribution, too much intermittent, too little sustained flow. Sirens layered on sirens without the resolution of them either approaching or receding. Just accumulating, stacking, a city making distress sounds it couldn't locate the source of. Dominguez stopped at the exterior wall and looked at her phone. The screen showed 4 bars dropping to 2 as I watched. "I have 7 people in the West Wing shelter room who need to be moved," she said. "The shelter room has a 12-hour supply limit. It was designed for lockdown, not extended occupation. If I can't get back to them..." "We'll get them out," Carla said. The decision was that fast. No consultation, no risk calculus performed aloud. This was the thing about Carla that I had been calibrating to for 40 days. Her moral architecture was already built. She didn't deliberate over whether to help. She deliberated over how. I had not yet fully built mine. I was constructing it in real time, using her as a load-bearing reference. We worked back through the service corridors, Carla leading, Dominguez directing from behind me through a building she knew better than anyone in our group. The basement level had remained largely clear. Whatever organized the infected appeared to prioritize the routes and spaces that more closely replicated normal human traffic patterns. Corridors used by staff rather than the public were navigable, at least for now. The West Wing shelter room was behind a pharmacy storage area on the ground floor. Dominguez knocked in a pattern: 3 short, 2 long, 1 short, and the door opened inward to reveal a room the size of a generous office, occupied by 17 people in various states of shock, calm, and the particular exhausted alertness that comes after hours of waiting for a door to be tested from the outside. I scanned the room in the automatic way training had embedded. Threats, exits, injuries, dynamics. My scan snagged on two things. First, a man in the far corner who was holding a compress to his forearm with an expression of careful minimization, the look of someone managing a fact they haven't reported. Second, a woman near the window holding a child of perhaps 5, both of them asleep despite everything, the child's face buried in the woman's neck, with the absolute trust of someone too young to understand that trust has conditions. Carla saw the man with the compress at the same moment I did. Our eyes met briefly. We both understood what the compress might mean and what our protocol required and what the consequences of the protocol were in this room full of people who had made it this far. She crossed to him, spoke quietly. "Sir, your arm." He looked up. He was perhaps 50, with the bearing of an administrator, someone accustomed to managing situations from a position of information control. The information he was controlling now was written on his face, clearly enough. "I was bitten," he said, quietly, carefully, as if precision in the delivery might alter what it contained. The room didn't change temperature, but several people moved in the subcortical way of bodies responding to a hard word before the brain finishes processing it. Carla's expression didn't change either. "How long ago?" 90 minutes, I feel." He stopped, reassessed. "I feel the same." "Are you symptomatic?" "No, I don't think so. I'm monitoring myself." The administrator's instinct to manage, to report, to maintain process even when the process has no resolution built in. There was a long silence in the room that I felt in my sternum. "We move in 3 minutes," Carla said to the room. Not as a response to the man, as a fact that superseded the conversation. I spent those 3 minutes near the door, watching the corridor, not looking at the man with the compress on his arm, and feeling the first full weight of what it meant to operate in a world where the tools of justice, badge, protocol, due process had been designed for a different kind of wrong. We moved 17 people through the basement service corridor in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Dominguez had identified an exterior access point 2 blocks east, adjacent to a parking structure that she believed was still navigable. Believed, not confirmed, which was a distinction she made out loud, and I respected her for. In a situation where certainty was a vanishing resource, precision about what you did and didn't know was its own kind of integrity. The man with the compress on his arm moved with the group. He had given his name as Gerald Ashworth. He walked at a measured, deliberate pace, as though taking his own physiological inventory with each step, comparing the current reading to the last one and calculating the delta. He was not symptomatic. He was also not safe, in a categorical sense that everyone present understood and nobody stated. Because stating it would require a response that none of us had the infrastructure for in this corridor. At this moment, with 17 people to move and 2 blocks between us and a viable exit. Carla walked beside me for a moment, near the middle of the group. "The children's hospital is 6 blocks north," she said quietly. "I know. I grew up 4 streets from here." I looked at her. In 40 days, this was the first personal geography she had offered. "My mother still lives on Pembroke Street," she said, not asking for anything, stating a weight she was carrying so that the carrying of it was acknowledged by at least one other person. "We'll go there," I said, as though the we were established, which it was, without either of us deciding it. We were partners. The decision had already been made in the grammar of that word. She nodded once and moved back to the front of the group. The parking structure, when we reached it, was accessible and partially occupied by civilian vehicles but empty of people, which made it valuable as a staging point. Dominguez got her people inside and to the upper levels, away from street-level access. She established a head count, identified the 2 individuals with any practical medical training in the group, delegated without hesitation, and turned back to us. "You're not staying," she said. It wasn't a question. "We have to keep moving," Carla confirmed. Dominguez looked at us both for a moment, with an expression that I can only describe as the specific regard one professional has for another when they recognize that the other person is about to do something that will cost them considerably. "There's a vehicle entrance on the north face. The ramp leads directly to Mason Street. From there, straight north." She paused. "Gerald is not going to make it," she said, quietly to us, away from the group. Neither of us responded, because she wasn't telling us something we didn't know. She was externalizing it, making it a shared fact rather than a private calculation, so that it existed in the world between us, acknowledged, and we could all 3 continue moving without the weight of it being carried alone. "Take care of your people," Carla told her. "Take care of yours," Dominguez said. We took the north ramp. Carla radioed our position to dispatch, got a fragmented response, logged it, moved on. The street outside was beginning to show the early signs of what a city looks like when the infrastructure governing behavior, lights, schedules, the implicit contracts of public space begins to dissolve. Not collapsed yet, dissolving. The difference was still visible if you knew what to look for. I was learning what to look for faster than I had any right to. 2 blocks north on Mason Street, a police cruiser sat empty at an angle across the lane with both doors open and the radio still broadcasting. I checked the plates. Precinct 7. One of the units Harmon had sent east. Now here, on Mason Street, 6 blocks west of where it had been dispatched. Carla looked at the cruiser for a long moment, looked at the radio, did not touch it. We kept moving north. Carla's mother's name was Elena Voss, and she answered the door before we knocked. She must have seen us coming from the upstairs window, the one above the entrance that looked down on the short porch, which was the kind of architectural detail you know about a house if you grew up in it. She was 71, small-built, with the same dark hair as her daughter, but worn loose, and she stood in the doorway with the expression of a woman who had been managing fear all day by converting it into practical tasks and had just run out of tasks. The house on Pembroke Street was a narrow 2-story row house with a deep backyard and solid pre-war construction, the kind of building that had been standing long enough to have earned some confidence in its own permanence. Elena had the windows covered on the ground floor, not boarded, but curtained with the heavy thermal drapes that were meant for insulation and happened now to serve a secondary purpose. She had moved furniture against the back door without being told to. She had filled every container in the kitchen with water. She had a first aid kit open on the kitchen table, already partially used. "You're hurt?" Carla asked, seeing the kit. "Neighbor, Mr. Patterson. He came to the front door about 2 hours ago. I let him in before I understood." She stopped. "He was bitten, on the hand. I cleaned and dressed it. He's in the back bedroom." The same pattern, the compress, the 90-minute window, the careful, managing self-assessment. Carla looked at me briefly, then followed her mother to the back bedroom. I stayed in the kitchen, near the hallway entrance, listening to the house and the street simultaneously. The street had gone quieter in the last hour in a way that wasn't peaceful. The silence of the pre-dawn isn't peaceful either, not when you understand what's sleeping in it. From the bedroom, I heard Carla's voice low, even, professional, and her mother's, answering in the same pitch people use when they are trying not to let what they're saying reach the person they're discussing. And then a third voice, older, male, careful. Mr. Patterson managing his own inventory, reporting to people who needed accurate information and were kind enough not to say aloud what accurate information in this case implied. I stood in Elena Voss's kitchen and looked at a refrigerator covered in photographs held by small tourist magnets from cities I didn't recognize. A younger Carla in half a dozen of them, school events, a graduation, a birthday table full of people I'd never meet. 15 years of a person's life visible in refrigerator archaeology, all of it predating the woman who drove with one hand and ate protein bars without looking and pointed her weapon with the kind of control that cost more than it appeared to. She came back to the kitchen alone. "He's symptomatic," she said. "Early stage, but definite. Your mother knows." "She knew before I did." A pause. "She dressed his wound, Daniel. She was kind to him. She didn't know at the time, and she was kind to him. And that is going to be—" She stopped. "I know," I said. We stood in the kitchen with the weight of the next decision between us, which was not whether but how and when and who. The decisions that don't have clean answers, not because the situation is unclear, but because the situation is completely clear, and the clarity is unbearable. I was 41 days into being a police officer. The academy had run me through every protocol, not this one. This one existed in the gap between what institutions could prepare you for and what life eventually presented regardless. "She can't stay here," Carla said. "Not with him in the building, not past the next 2 hours." "Where do we take her?" She picked up the map on her phone, still functioning, just barely. "Callaway is still active, if it holds." "We move now, then." She looked out the curtained window, at the street she'd grown up on, at the ordinary afternoon light coming through the edge of the fabric. "Yes," she said, "now." Getting Elena out required 20 minutes of the kind of quiet, systematic preparation that Carla applied to everything. Checking exits, establishing a route, briefing her mother in the same even registers she used for witnesses and victims and anyone who needed information delivered without the emotional freight that would slow their compliance. Elena listened the way someone listens when they already know most of what they're being told and are simply confirming the details against their own internal assessment. Before we left, Carla went back to the bedroom. I didn't go with her. The door was closed. I stood in the hallway for 4 minutes, and I will not describe what those 4 minutes contained. What I will say is that when Carla came back out, her face carried an expression I'd never seen on it in 40 days, not grief exactly, and not its suppression, but something that existed in the very narrow space between them. A face doing the work of a face that has decided it will process this correctly and completely, but not right now, not in this hallway, not while there is still movement required of the body. She looked at me. I said nothing. She nodded once. We collected Elena. We went out the front. The street was clear for a block and a half, and then it was not. The figure we encountered moving west on Pembroke was moving with that recognizable gait that learned from description walk, and was close enough that routing around it meant cutting through a residential side yard. Carla moved her mother smoothly, without urgency in the motion, which was the right choice. Urgency transmits and creates secondary problems in the people you're protecting. Elena moved with her daughter's hand on her elbow and never looked back. We made Callaway Street in 16 minutes. The precinct was still operational, but looked nothing like the building I'd left 4 hours earlier. The parking lot held twice the vehicle's more jurisdictional arrivals: 2 National Guard utility trucks, an armored vehicle from County SWAT parked at the entrance. Inside, the command room had been reorganized around a central table with a city map that now had colored overlays from multiple agencies, each using their own notation. which meant the map was more accurate and less legible than the one Carla had made alone on a clean sheet with a single red marker. Harmon found us immediately. He registered Elena with the focused neutrality of a man who had processed too much information today to have a normal social response to any of it. Medical overflow is at St. Andrew's Community Center, 6 blocks northeast. Civilian sheltering is... She stays here, Carla said. Policy is... She stays here. Harmon looked at her, looked at Elena, made the calculation that some policies are designed for ordinary situations and updated accordingly. She stays here, he agreed. I found Pruitt near the equipment cage where he seemed to default to, which I was beginning to understand was less about the equipment and more about the corner, which had sight lines on both major room entrances. Tactical habit, comfortable without being noticed. How bad is it? I asked. He considered the question. The eastern corridor is gone. Completely. We have confirmed reports of it reaching the river district. The guard is deploying a quarantine perimeter at the old highway bypass, but that's 8 miles out inside those 8 miles. Response is whatever we in the county can manage. He paused. Cell towers 1 through 4 are down. The emergency broadcast system activated 40 minutes ago. Another pause. And we got a transmission from Precinct 4 about 90 minutes ago. Partial, degraded. But they mentioned names. Officers who'd turned inside the building. Inside the building. I sat with that information for a moment. My class, I said. There were 11 of us in the field rotation, spread across 4 precincts. Pruitt's expression answered before his words did. We don't have confirmed status on most of them. The clock on the wall read 6:22 p.m., less than 9 hours since Delmore Avenue, since Raymond Bellamy and his missing shoe. The mathematics of a single day's capacity for rearrangement was something I had not previously understood in my bones, the way you understand arithmetic in the abstract for years before someone puts a physical object in your hands, and suddenly the abstraction becomes irreversible weight. I was beginning to understand it now. The transmission came in at 8:47 p.m. on a frequency we almost missed. The duty officer monitoring communications, a young officer named Serrano, who had been cycling through frequencies with the methodical exhaustion of someone doing a necessary job in the absence of any conviction that it would yield anything, caught it mid-sentence and called across the room. Carla and I were at the table, working with the county liaison on a sector map update, and we crossed to the radio station before Serrano had finished calling. The voice on the frequency was male. Young, or that's how it registered, though fear compresses a voice in ways that make age unreliable as a reed. The transmission was fragmentary, interrupted by static that might have been equipment or might have been distance. Holding at the Garrison Avenue substation, we have the 12 civilians, 3 officers, one of whom is non-responsive, and we are not. The south access is compromised. I repeat, if anyone is receiving this transmission, the Garrison Avenue electrical substation, we need. My name is static. Several seconds of it. Officer Kyle Merritt, badge 1147, Precinct 4, if anyone. I was standing up before I registered standing up. Kyle Merritt, badge 1147. We had graduated from the academy in the same cohort. He had been the one who, after the final fitness assessment, had produced a bag of those terrible orange peanut-shaped candy things from his locker and passed them around like they were celebratory cigars, and laughed at his own ridiculous gesture with the unself-conscious ease of someone who doesn't require the world to take him seriously before he can take himself seriously. He had been posted to Precinct 4 on a split rotation. He was 24 years old. Garrison Avenue substation was 11 blocks east. Carla was looking at the sector map. 11 blocks east put it inside the contested corridor, not in the fully compromised zone, but adjacent to it, which was operationally a distinction without permanence. The area between adjacent to compromised and inside compromised was, in the current environment, a matter of perhaps 30 minutes. "Harmon," Carla said. Harmon was at her shoulder before she finished the word. He'd heard the transmission from across the room. "We can't deploy east," he said. Not to block her, I realized, as a statement of current resource status. "I have one functional unit available, and the guard is tied up at the bypass perimeter." "We're the unit," Carla said. "Voss, we're the unit," she said again, without elevation, without argument, as a simple, accurate description of available options. Harmon looked at me, as though my 41 days of experience constituted a vote that mattered. "He's my classmate," I said. Harmon's jaw moved slightly. "I cannot authorize." "Log it as a voluntary action," Carla said. "Off deployment roster. Whatever the paperwork requires. Log it however you need to log it. But we're going." I watched Harmon's face go through a sequence of responses: institutional resistance, legal calculation, the recognition that the institution whose procedures he was trying to protect was currently in the process of being restructured by events that did not consult those procedures. And then, beneath all of that, something simpler. A man who had been a cop for 23 years, looking at a 15-year officer and a 41-day rookie who were going to drive 11 blocks east into a deteriorating situation to retrieve a young man on a radio, and understanding that this was, at its most essential, what the job had always actually been. "Take the armored," he said. We took the armored. The armored vehicle handled differently than a patrol cruiser, heavier in its responsiveness, delayed by weight, but with a solidity on the road that recalibrated your relationship to the space around you. The windows were reinforced, the doors sealed with a compression that made the outside sounds hit differently, more muted, as though the vehicle were deciding how much of the world you needed to hear. Carla drove. I managed the radio and the sector map and the spotlight mounted on the passenger side that could sweep a full 90 degrees. We were 4 blocks east when the street texture changed. Fewer abandoned vehicles here, and more evidence of recent movement, not ordered movement. But the entropic drift of a large number of people, or formerly people, relocating without plan. Storefronts with windows gone. A fire hydrant open and running in the middle of the block. The water spreading across the pavement in a wide, shallow sheet that reflected our headlights and made the street look briefly, wrongly, like a river. I swept the spotlight methodically. The infected didn't respond to light the way a person does. There was no flinch, no avoidance, no hand raised against the glare. They moved through it as though it didn't register, which it apparently didn't. And this made the spotlight useful not for deterrence, but simply for identification. You swept the light and cataloged what it found and routed accordingly. 6 blocks east on the corner of Garrison and Marsh, we found a cluster 8, possibly 10, occupying the intersection in that diffuse, non-coordinated arrangement that was their version of a group. Not gathered around anything, not pursuing anything currently in view. Simply occupying the space with the impartial permanence of weather. "North approach," Carla said. I found the route on the map. 1 block north, then 2 blocks east, then south on Kerwin to Garrison from the other direction. Possible. Not confirmed clear, but the sector data put it at lower density. We made the north approach in 4 minutes. The substation was a low industrial building set back from the street behind a chain-link perimeter, with exterior lighting on emergency power that gave it a cold, flat illumination against the evening dark. 2 vehicles were parked against the fence, a Precinct 4 cruiser and a civilian minivan. The facility's personnel entrance, a heavy steel door, was closed. I got on the transmission frequency. Kyle Merritt. This is Officer Daniel Reyes, Precinct 3. We are at the north perimeter of the Garrison Avenue substation. If you are receiving, respond. 6 seconds of static. Then, Reyes? The voice thinner than I remembered it, but unmistakably his, that slight upward inflection on questions that made him sound perpetually slightly surprised by the world. We're here, I said. How's your status? 15 people, the civilians plus us. Officer Huang she's not turned, she's injured. I think broken arm, maybe ribs. We have the interior secured. South exterior there's a lot of them on the south side. We're coming to you. North personnel entrance. The panel code is 7714. But Reyes... A pause, static in it. There's something I need to tell you before you come in. I waited. One of the civilians, a man named Castor. I'm not certain, but I think he may have been exposed. He hasn't presented any symptoms, but about 3 hours ago, he was outside the secure zone for approximately 8 minutes. And when he came back in, he said he wasn't in contact with anything, but I couldn't verify it. And I don't know what to do with that information, and I've been sitting here with it for 3 hours, and I needed to tell someone before you walked in. I looked at Carla. She was already looking at me. The gap between I think and I know in this world was the gap between a man's life and a decision that couldn't be unmade. We're coming in, I said. We'll assess. I put down the radio and thought about Gerald Ashworth's compress, and Carla's 4 minutes behind a closed door, and what the word assess actually required of the person doing the assessing. We keyed in 7714. The door opened. Inside the substation, the air smelled of industrial machinery and old concrete, and the particular human staleness of a closed space occupied by too many frightened people for too many hours. Emergency lighting threw everything in high-contrast shadows, bright edges, and deep, flat darks. The kind of environment that plays differently in the peripheral vision than it does straight on. Kyle Merritt met us at the inner door. He was a version of the person I'd shared a locker room with, a graduation stage with, an academy cafeteria with, but compressed. The way people are compressed by long-term acute stress. Thinner in the face, with eyes that had been working at high intensity for 9 hours and showed it the way overtaxed machinery shows wear. He was wearing his vest, which told me he'd been operating at readiness level for most of those 9 hours. He gripped my arm when he saw me in a way that wasn't dramatic, just the quick grip of someone who has been holding something difficult alone and is relieved, in a cellular way, to not be alone with it anymore. Carla Voss, he said to my partner. Kyle. She was already scanning the room. 15 people arranged across the main floor of the substation in the unconscious social geometry of shared emergency, the families together. The solitary individuals at measured distances. The injured woman, Officer Huang, propped against the near wall with her arms stabilized against her torso, conscious, tracking us with dark, precise eyes from beneath a significant amount of bruising above her left eyebrow. Multiple fractures, Huang said by way of greeting. Don't ask me to carry anything. We won't, Carla said. Can you walk? I can walk. I've been walking. My eyes moved across the room, doing the inventory that was becoming automatic. Threats, injuries, dynamics, exits. And then, in the far corner, near the secondary equipment bank, a man sitting with his back against the wall, knees drawn up, watching us with the particular alertness of a person who knows that new arrivals in his current situation means new assessment, and who understands what he's being assessed for. He was perhaps 45, heavy-set, wearing a fleece jacket and the kind of durable outdoor pants that suggested he'd been in the middle of something practical when the day went wrong. There was nothing outwardly wrong with him. He met my gaze directly, not defensively, the look of someone who understood what was being looked for and was trying to provide evidence in their own favor through the simple act of appearing normal. I crossed to him, crouched. "Mr. Castor? Dario Castor?" He offered his hand. I shook it, which told me something I couldn't fully process. Nothing felt wrong in the physical contact, which meant nothing and also wasn't nothing. "I know what you're going to ask. Tell me what happened outside." He did. 8 minutes. Generator panel access that required exterior passage. He had moved quickly, kept to the wall, seen 2 of the infected at distance to the southeast, maintained distance. He was certain, his word there had been no contact. He was aware of what contact implied, and he wanted us to understand that he was telling us the truth, not because the truth was comfortable, but because the alternative, carrying a lie into a group of people depending on accurate information, was worse than whatever the truth cost him. I looked at him. He looked back. There was a version of this conversation where protocol was clear, where the institutional logic of containment had a clean answer. But clean answers had been expiring all day. And what I had instead was a man in a corner who was either telling the truth or was not, whose life or death depended on which. And the tool I had for determining which was my own judgment untested. 41-day judgment in a room full of people whose survival might depend on whether I got this right. Kyle was behind me, waiting. I stood up, turned to face the room. I told Dario Castor to stay visible to me during the extraction. Not isolation, not separation. Visible. I explained why in terms that didn't require me to say what I was actually doing, which was running a continuous behavioral assessment against a symptom timeline I had assembled from 9 hours of field observation. He understood. He agreed without argument, which was itself a data point, and moved to the outer edge of the group where I could track him without making it obvious to the other 14 people that tracking was happening. Kyle watched me do this. He pulled me aside after, near the equipment bank. "You're not detaining him." "I'm watching him." "That's the same?" "It's not the same," I said. "Detention requires a determination. I don't have one yet." He processed this. "What if you're wrong? What if he's—" "Then I'll know in the next 40 minutes, and I'll handle it then." I looked at him. "What would you have done 3 hours ago, when you first suspected?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. I've been asking myself that." "That's why you radioed." "Yeah. I'm not going to tell you that was wrong. You were holding something too heavy to hold alone. That's not a weakness, Kyle. That's accurate load assessment." He nodded. Something in his shoulders adjusted, not released, but redistributed. The difference between carrying a weight and carrying it in a better position. The extraction plan was straightforward in design and complicated in execution. The armored vehicle could carry 8. The remaining civilians, 9 adults, 2 children would need to travel in the Precinct 4 cruiser and the civilian minivan, with Huang in the cruiser. The route was north on Kerwin, then west on Darby to avoid the Garrison Marsh intersection cluster, then straight north to Callaway. Estimated transit time, 12 minutes if the route held. If. We briefed the group. Carla did most of it. She had the register for it. The quality of voice that communicated we have done this before, and it worked even in a situation where the specific version of this was unprecedented. People respond to certainty of manner when certainty of outcome is unavailable. They filed out in the organized sequence she established. the children first between two adults, Wang in the middle, Kyle at the rear of the civilian column. I was at the perimeter door when Dario Castor stopped beside me. He wasn't showing symptoms, 8 hours after exposure if exposure had occurred, and nothing. Which was either evidence that his account was accurate, or evidence that the timeline was individual, or evidence of nothing conclusive. The uncertainty was structural, not resolvable with the tools I had. "You've been watching me," he said. "Yes." And you're not showing anything." He absorbed this, looked at his own hands and the flat emergency lighting as though they were instruments he was checking. "If I'd been exposed, if the symptoms came later, you would have had to." "Yes. And you still let me stay with the group." "I made a judgment." "Based on what?" I thought about it. Really thought about it, not reaching for the institutional answer, but looking at what had actually guided the decision. Based on the fact that you told the truth when you didn't have to. That you understood what the truth cost you and you told it anyway. That's not a guarantee, but it was real information, and I used it. He was quiet for a moment. "That's not protocol." "No," I said. "It's not." We went out the door. The convoy moved north on Kerwin in a column with 20 feet between vehicles. Carla drove the armored with 8 passengers, including Elena, who had been transferred from the precinct at the last moment when the Callaway building's northern access reported a breach in progress. Kyle drove the Precinct 4 cruiser. A civilian named Torres, a man who had been a high school biology teacher before today, and had covered that fact with the kind of practical competence that suggested biology teaching had not been his first identity, drove the minivan. I rode in the armored's passenger position, working the radio and the spotlight in alternation, logging the route as we traveled it. The night had gone full dark, and Hargrove City in full dark, without its normal lighting signals and storefronts, and the orange sodium of the street lamps, most of which were out, looked like a city viewed from a great distance, or like a city in a photograph from a time before someone had thought to make it bright. 3 blocks from Callaway, on the corner of Darby and 9th. The spotlight caught a figure in the westbound lane. I held it there for a moment, the automatic identification sweep, the categorization, the routing calculation. And then my brain finished loading the image that my eyes had already delivered. And something in my chest went very still. The figure was female, late 20s. She was wearing the patrol uniform of the Hargrove City Police Department, Precinct 3. Badge still on. Hair in a tight regulation braid that I recognized because I had watched it being adjusted in the side mirror of a patrol cruiser on the morning of my 3rd day in field rotation. Officer Anna Solis, my training class, posted to a beat patrol assignment on the Eastern Corridor. She was standing in the middle of Darby and 9th with the stance and the gaze and the particular quality of wrongness that I had cataloged all day, every time I had seen it, and had never once recognized before in a face I knew. The armored was still moving. 3 seconds to the intersection. Carla said, "Reyes," not as a command, as a preparation. She said it the way you say someone's name when you need them to understand that what comes next is going to require everything they have, and that you're telling them a breath in advance so that the everything has time to assemble. I had my hand on the spotlight control. The figure in the road did not move toward us, did not move away. Stood in the light with her face fully illuminated and her eyes present and empty in the way I had learned to identify. And in that face, I found every impossible thing about this day concentrated into a single moment that my training had given me a protocol for, and my humanity was refusing to execute. Carla stopped the vehicle. "Reyes." Again, the same register. Steady, patient. The voice of someone who understood that the decision had to be mine and was giving me the 8 seconds required to make it. Behind us, the cruiser and the minivan had stopped. Kyle's voice came over the radio. "What are we—" and then stopped, either because he saw or because he understood from the silence that stopping was the only appropriate response. I looked at Anna Solis standing in the road. I looked at her badge. At the braid I'd seen adjusted in a side mirror on my 3rd day. I put my hand on the door handle. "Daniel," Carla said. "I know," I said. "She can't." "I know." "Then why?" "Because she was my classmate." My voice was very level. I had made the decision not in the last 8 seconds, but in the last 9 hours. Every increment of it. And this was simply the moment the decision announced itself as complete. Because nobody should be standing alone in the dark, in the middle of the street in their own uniform, and have everyone just drive past. I opened the door. I walked to the front of the vehicle, into the full wash of the headlights. I stood 30 feet from her. I said her name. She turned toward me. The motion was that motion fluid in the wrong way, purposeful without purpose. I stood there for the last moment before the moment that couldn't be taken back. And then I did what the day had been teaching me to do. Since Raymond Bellamy's doorway, since the 3rd floor, since the hospital corridor and the closed bedroom door and Gerald Ashworth's compress and Dario Castor's hands in emergency lighting. I did it without looking away from her face. I did it because looking away was the one thing I absolutely refused to do. The street went quiet. I walked back to the vehicle, got in, closed the door. Carla put the Armored in drive. Nobody spoke. We covered the last 3 blocks to Callaway in silence, and I watched the city moving past the reinforced windows, and I thought about a bag of orange peanut-shaped candy in a locker room, and a braid being adjusted in a side mirror, and Raymond Bellamy's missing shoe, and what the word served actually meant in the context of this job. On this day, in this specific world that had spent 12 hours becoming something that neither the word serve nor the word protect had been designed to accommodate. We pulled into the precinct lot. The lot was full of people and light and the organized chaos of a situation that was being managed imperfectly by humans who had chosen to keep managing it. I stayed in the vehicle for an additional minute. Then I got out. The badge was still on my chest. I left it there. There are 41 days that exist before the world changed, and then there is everything after. The before days feel like they belong to a different person, someone who worried about boot breaking in and impressing a 15-year veteran, and whether his grip pressure measured up on the range. Someone who understood the job as a set of protocols organized around predictable categories of human failure. That person handed in a use of force report with 3 entries by the time the sun came back up. Carla signed off on it. Harmon filed it in a system that may or may not still exist in any meaningful form. The paperwork exists somewhere, presumably, in the bureaucratic archaeology of a city trying to document an event for which the documentation categories hadn't been built yet. What I know is this: the badge doesn't make the decision for you. Training gives you the architecture, but the weight-bearing elements, the ones that hold when the frame gets tested, those aren't installed at the academy. They're installed in the moments when the protocol fails and you're standing in a headlight beam in front of a face you recognize, and the whole geometry of who you are resolves into a single action that you will carry every day afterward. I was 41 days in when this started. I'm still counting.